People who live in small towns, what's the story everyone knows but no one likes talking about? The superintendent of my hometown school district got a DUI in a school zone and used his wealth and influence in the community to not only get out of jail time, but to get the arrest completely scrubbed from his criminal record. He sued multiple people for slander for mentioning it publicly because, as far as the official record is concerned, it never happened. There is a similar situation with the actual sheriff of the county close to where I live. He crashed a car going back to his wife's house from the mistress's house, but no one can prove it because it is considered slander. In my town we had the mayor's daughter drive drunk through a pizza place and get out of the car and walk up to the counter and try to order. It was on the news for like one day and then disappeared completely. The place just opened back up. We had a House of Representatives daughter do that in my town. Never made it to the news. I can only assume he paid for it to go away. There's a dungeon under the abandoned yellow house in the park that was used by the current owner's great-grandfather. He admitted on his deathbed that he was the cause of 13 disappearances from the 1910s to the 1930s. Issue is, we don't know who the 13 victims are, since the surrounding area has had hundreds of disappearances over the decades and we have nothing to go off of except a period of nearly 30 years. Plus, no one wants to think about a relative or ancestor being locked up in there. A gazebo was removed from the town green because it became a place late at night where people were regularly caught having sex. It was a beautiful gazebo with comfortable benches, like church pews, where people could relax in the warm weather and enjoy the town green. But no more. There's a statue of a volunteer firefighter at the corner of the village's busiest intersection. He was memorialized for being selfless and being the embodiment of being a good neighbor. Nobody ever talks about though that when he was alive they called him Richie the Retard. I would like to know more. Why did they call him Richie the Retard? Was he just not a bright individual and it was a somewhat affectionate name? Or was it a malicious name and now everyone feels guilty? He had a mental disability and a gait. It wasn't like it was a big secret the people he hung out with called him Richie the Retard to his face and he'd curse them out. These were like upper echelon people too. He had it in with the local politicians and all the emergency services heads. They were the first to ask him to go get drunk with them. He died falling down a flight of stairs. A decade later his friends saved up and had a statue erected in his honor. God forbid you said Richie the Retard now. People would rather the history of the man be whitewashed and forgotten that, even though he was widely respected, they were still pretty big assholes to him. One day I see a bunny, but like a huge bunny. I thought it was normal sized, but as I got closer I realized I was wrong. Thing was an absolute unit, like medium sized dog. As time went on I would occasionally see more and more of these gigantic mutated rabbits. So turns out this guy had a couple of pet giant rabbits and then moved out to college. The official story his parents gave him was that his beloved pet rabbits got sick like a week after he moved out and had to be put down. Dude was devastated. My guess is that the rabbits weren't put down and were instead released. Now I'm not sure if Flemish giants can interbreed with wild bunnies, but everyone swears that even the local bunny population is composed of mega bunnies. And the parents are low-key kind of hated by everyone now for being dicks to their child. About 3 years ago a young lesbian couple came up missing. They found their car half submerged in the river, but no sign of the girls. They found them a week later in the river dead with bullet wounds in their heads. It devastated the town when it happened, but I feel like it got covered up quickly so it wouldn't scare off any tourists. They made a small memorial near the river for the girls, and it's been vandalized beyond repair twice now. In the other town I lived in, the mayor's wife killed an elderly couple on Christmas Eve while driving drunk. She never did any time. Completely swept under the rug, but he didn't get re-elected thankfully. There's a pretty influential guy in town who works for a pretty big local company and his wife committed suicide a few years back. We also have another pretty big wig and he broke up with his missus because she caught him having sex with a man. One of the managers of a pretty big local hotel is a cross-dresser. Another local hotel is owned by an elderly couple in their 60s and the man likes to have sex with twinks. His receptionist is a 19-year-old guy who got a brand new 1 Series BMW as a Christmas gift from the hotel owner. A local village 5 miles out of town is famous for having a really high incidence of cousins marrying and children being born with webbed feet. Another local village 5 miles out of town is famous for its thriving swingers community. There's a famous family in the area who is known to have practices cannibalism during WW2 food shortages. One of the local taxi companies is a front for a drug dealing operations. They only serve people they know, and a 2-mile taxi ride with them is about $50. 2 guys robbed one of those car compating places where they mash up old vehicles into giant metal bricks. They went in at night, dropped off by their GFS to go get parts and scrap to sell, I guess. They'd done it before, the owner found out and waited for them one night, shot both in the backs of the heads, put their bodies in a car, and crushed it up. The truck didn't come to pick up the metal for a couple days, so the one with their bodies sat out in the heat. The officers only found them after the GFS telling police they dropped them off there and couldn't find them again. They checked the place and found them from the smell. I remember before the 2 guys were found, missing posters of them were all over the town. Change of tone on this one, but I figured I'd share anyway. I grew up in a tiny farm town in PA. On Christmas Eve, one of the local farmers would go to all the houses with kids and climb on the roof and walk around for a minute or two to keep our belief in Santa alive and well. It's hilarious cause he never asked, just always did it every year. It obviously wasn't talked about much, so that the kids never caught on, but was truly so cute. Senior year of high school. First week of the new school year. It happened during lunch, and by the end of the day the entire school knew. We all wanted to talk about it, but we had to do it in whispers. But one way or another, everyone eventually knew. 2 freshmen did anal in the library. A small town is where everybody knows everybody else's business, but each week they buy the local paper to see who has been caught doing it. This guy I know we call the ginger fucked an ostrich. Allegedly. There's a formerly respected lawyer in my hometown that's been practicing since the 70s and has been involved in a sex trafficking circle for decades. My town has a big drug and poverty problem, so when women who were in trouble for drugs would come to him as clients, he would offer them drugs or lenient sentences because of his legal connections in exchange for prostitution. The worst part is that police, judges, parole officers and other respected men in the community not only knew, or at least suspected what he was doing, but many of them took part in it. So the women could never turn to local law enforcement because of the corruption. An article was published last year that went viral in my hometown, but as far as I know, the lawyer is still being investigated. In what was once voted the most beautiful small town in America, a police officer was driving home at the end of his shift when, on an off-ramp, he encountered a bunch of brush inexplicably placed in the roadway blocking his path. When he got out of his cruiser to clear it, he was assassinated by a killer with a shotgun. That was in 2013, and the case has yet to be solved. Worse yet, it unwound a mire of controversy and conspiracy. A year later, a mother and daughter were found brutally murdered. The mother shot multiple times, and the daughter bludgeoned, and her throat slit. A year after that, a 35-year-old woman went missing. And a little over a year later, that woman's father was shot to death on his own property while hunting. Theories abound about the connections between these 4 unsolved cases: local government corruption, intimate affairs and murder plots, and the FBI now maintains a near constant presence in this small Kentucky town of only 12,000 citizens. All of this in Bardstown, Kentucky. The Bardstown podcast does an excellent job of breaking it all down. In my town it's how the local university medical center overprescribed oxycontin for everything. Then when the jig was up, and 20% of the state was addicted to oxys, they pulled all prescribing of oxycontin or any other narcotics, which created a heroin vacuum. They are the reason why everyone's kids and grandmothers are overdosing on heroin, but nobody says anything because jobs. They are the biggest employer in the state. Small village in England. All sorts of weird stuff happens. First, there was the traffic accident where the 2 leads in the local production of Romeo and Juliet were decapitated. Next, the local land baron was frying food after a night out drinking, left the gas on, and his entire house exploded. It was an ungodly house anyway. It definitely didn't fit with the village's rustic aesthetic. That's just the start of it. The local newspaper reporter was accidentally killed when a piece of the crumbling church rooftop fell on his head. Then the village florist was killed when she tripped and fell on her garden shears. Some people think there is more going on, but I think it's just a series of unfortunate accidents.